Welcome to the Upjab Podcast. I am live. I appreciate all the support I've been getting on the channel and on Twitter. Twitter's popping for me. And I appreciate all that love and support, and also here on YouTube, and more great things to come. But I appreciate all that. And this was what makes this a good time. What makes this a really good time to be talking boxing is there's actual boxing going on. This isn't a dead period. This is from April to late June. You got fight weekend after fight weekend after fight weekend. We got Spence versus Ugas and other fights coming up this weekend that we're going to be talking. We're going to be having a lot of previews here on this channel for the fights coming up this weekend. But I wanted to do my recap of this past weekend because I was off the grid camping over the weekend, didn't get to do any videos over the weekend. So I want to try to consolidate as many of them as possible in the next day or two as to what I saw over the past weekend, what stuck out to me, what surprised me. The most surprising result, just to jump off of it before I get into Golovkin and the fight that I featured, I told everybody the fight to look out for this past weekend was Lubin versus FUNdora, and it was. You don't get too many true toss-up fights, and you saw great action in that fight. And before I get into that, and I'll have a lot to say on Golovkin, I want to say that the most surprising result to me was Rosado losing to Shane Mosley Jr. because Shane Mosley Jr. just hasn't even been in a 12-round fight in his career. It was surprising to see Gabe Rosado. And look, Gabe Rosado's Gabe Rosado. He is if you look up gatekeeper opponent in the encyclopedia, and look, man, I appreciate this. Shout out to Wheelchair Man John. I always appreciate the support, man, and shout out to you. And shout out to OJ/22, man. I very much appreciate it. And I've said this often, and I try to say it as often as possible. The fact that anybody watches my content and gives comment and takes time out of their day to watch, greatly appreciated. So love the channel, keep up the great content, and that's what I'm trying to do, man. I'm just a dude from South Louisiana who has no boxing fans around me to talk boxing with, so I try to go to Twitter and YouTube to have people to talk boxing with. So that's what it is, man. And I appreciate the support from OJ22. But Shane Mosley Jr. is just a guy, lost the Contender Championship. And you saw it and you're like, oh, he's reached his ceiling. His ceiling will never be high. He'll never be a 12-round fighter. And then he comes over this past weekend and defeats Gabe Rosado. And you're like, where did that come from? How does Gabe Rosado lose that fight? And I understand he's coming off of a loss, but so is Shane Mosley Jr. against more inferior opposition. So that was surprising. Not only that he lost to Shane Mosley Jr., but in the fashion he did it in as well. He just wasn't that competitive, to be honest. And Shane Mosley Jr., that was the best he's looked in his career, in my opinion. And let's see what he can do going past that fight, because Gabe Rosado Jr. is a name. You got to give him that. So maybe he can parlay that into a bigger fight. I didn't see the Golovkin fight, but FUNdora versus Lubin was a really good fight. And then PBC judges were planning on robbing FUNdora too. I had FUNdora well ahead. I don't necessarily agree with that. I had that fight close. I thought Lubin was doing some good work in between, and that fight was a toss-up, but you saw each round, right? Like, besides the 7th round when Lubin caught him with that big shot, because Lubin kept catching him with those hooks in between everything FUNdora was landing. So you said, man, if one of those hooks lands right on FUNdora, then watch out. And he did land that into the 7th round, but then FUNdora, to his credit, came right back in the 8th round. Output, uppercuts, landing those shots. And Cunningham did the right thing by stopping the fight, so it was all for naught. But whether the fight was close on the scorecards or not, had that fight kept going and going from 9, 10, 11, 12, I expect FUNdora to win those rounds, and I expect FUNdora to win some of those rounds 10-8. So I think it would have been a moot point anyway. I think he would have ended up winning the fight pretty clear on the judges' scorecards. I had no idea that Mosley Rosado was ever happening. I always check the schedule. Yeah, it did. Flew under the radar, and not Rosado's best performance. I was surprised by that as well. Gabe is probably washed. Yeah, And Gabe is really at the point where he should probably step away from the sport, but we'll see. I'm sure they'll keep judge. I said that after his last fight, his last loss, people were saying, "Oh, this is a must win for Rosado." It's not. They will continue to walk Rosado out there as the gatekeeper for these young up and coming fighters for as long as Rosado is able to walk out there. I'm just telling you. The Beck the Bully fight was sort of like a one-off. Beck the Bully was winning that fight up until that point. Rosado landed a beautiful shot. Credit to him. But his dad is my favorite 135. Yeah, Shane Mosley Jr., Shane Mosley Sr. is a big, huge difference. Huge gap. Lubin did good work in spots. I gave him 2 rounds. I gave him more than that, but he was doing good spot, and that was a great fight. We'll talk about that more in a minute because I wanted to get to my Golovkin thoughts first. And before I get into that, I wanted to get my Ryan Garcia thoughts out the way. Look, man, let's talk about Ryan Garcia real quick. Fought Tagu. He was a minus 1,600 favorite. He just wasn't going to look that good in that fight, Tagu, with his style. But Garcia, as I stated last week, in the lead up to the fight, this was one of those fights where you weren't going to get anything out of it besides possibly a Ryan Garcia highlight reel KO. That's all we were going to get out of this activity. 15, 16-month layoff, so it's Ryan Garcia back. But we were never going to learn anything from this fight. And that's the sad part about this when judging it against other fights from this past weekend, where we had Lubin versus FUNdora. We're going to learn something about both fighters. Golovkin versus Murata. We're going to learn something about both fighters, particularly Golovkin, and they were both high-stakes fights. All right? Even Shane Mosley Jr. versus Gabe Rosado, we're going to learn something about both fighters and where they were at. And if Mosley Jr. wins that fight, which he did, possibly land something else. So there were other fights where stuff was at stake, and Ryan Garcia was not one of them. And the problem with Ryan Garcia right now and where he's at, and shout out to my guy Nando in the building, Nando Yamas. The problem with Ryan Garcia and where he's at right now is he doesn't have an identity as a fighter, as I stated last week. Everything that you can identify Ryan Garcia with has been outside of the ring. The social media following, the double in-bag punching, it's all been outside of the ring. He doesn't have an identity as a fighter. He hasn't been active enough. Just take FUNdora and Ryan Garcia and take where they were 3 years ago. Take both fighters. FUNdora 3 years ago, young guy, we didn't know much about him, but he fights 9 times in a 3-year period. Just 36 months ago, he fights 9 times. Ryan Garcia in that same span fights 5 times in 3 years. And FUNdora is doing it against a higher level of opposition. He's doing it against varying styles, and he's giving us more highlights than Ryan Garcia. So now you fast forward 3 years to present day, and FUNdora is number 3 in his weight class, behind Castaño and Charlo, who are fighting for undisputed. Ryan Garcia, we don't even know what he is because he just fought Tagu at 139 in a comeback fight after a 15-month layoff. We don't know if he's a 135-pounder. Is he a 140-pounder? We don't know if Ryan Garcia is going to fight and win. Ryan Garcia even said it himself yesterday. I saw an interview. He said, I'm not going to call anybody out because I'm at a point where I don't want to promise something to my fans that isn't going to happen. So he's still in a headspace, in my opinion, where he doesn't even know who he is. So how's the boxing public going to know who Ryan Garcia is if it looks like Ryan Garcia doesn't even know who Ryan Garcia is? He doesn't have an identity, and you have to have an identity. And to his credit, he's built up that base outside of the ring, much like Jake Paul, and he brings fans into the stands. But in order to get into top 10 pound for pound list, in order to be ranked top 5 in your weight class, you got to do something inside of the ring. And Ryan Garcia just hasn't done that yet. He hasn't. In order to start judging a fighter where you think he's at, you have to take shots from a good fighter. Has Ryan Garcia taken punishment inside the ring from a good fighter yet? Has he taken punches from a good fighter yet? I haven't seen that. I haven't seen that. So we don't know who Ryan Garcia is. And that's the problem. Even after this fight, who is he? When's he going to fight again? Where is he going to fight? What weight class is he going to fight? We don't know. We simply don't know. And this fight this past week, and it's good to get Ryan Garcia back and all that stuff. But what did it do? What do we know about Ryan Garcia sitting here on Monday evening that we didn't know about Ryan Garcia Friday evening? Nothing. We don't know. We don't know anything. And that's the thing. Lubin versus FUNdora. We know each guy gave us something else to look at, right? So we know things about Erickson Lubin on Monday evening that we didn't know Friday evening. Same with FUNdora, same with Triple G, same with Murata. We can't say the same thing about Triple G. So even Erickson Lubin losing, even Murata losing, I have more respect for those guys after this past weekend because they were in there in high stakes fights and they were taking punches from good to great fighters. I can't say the same for Ryan Garcia. Just another wasted outing for me. I don't know. Listening at work. Shout out Nando. Shout out Wheelchair Man John. Wishing Garcia would stay active. He would be an Oscar de la Hoya type if he got serious. He definitely has a built-in base for sure. Definitely has that built-in base. Stay active. Just stay active. And that's what Golovkin proved over his career. More on that in a minute. I really want to, towards the end of this video, feature Lubin versus FUNdora, since that was the fight of the weekend. So let me get to Golovkin before I get to that. And before I get to that, let me get to some comments. Garcia needs to fight 3 times this year. Yes. Stay active. Stay active. Doesn't matter. Look, stay active. Stay in people's faces, and the big fight is going to come to you. Lack of body work was glaring for Ryan Garcia. I trust Denim Don, Joe Goosen. I think it's a good fit for him. I think Goosen's a good fit for him. But we'll see. It's just activity, right? You got to get the activity. You got to get the work in. You got to see multiple fights with Goosen to see if it's working. And you got to get multiple fights with Goosen in order for them to build that chemistry. So that should be the main focus of Garcia this year. Stay active. Stay active. Garcia needs to step it up and take on a real challenge. Yes. And shout out to D-Style Boxing, HCP Network. They are on his channel at 7 p.m. tonight. HCP. So check him out on his channel, 7 p.m. tonight. For some beautiful, beautiful coverage. Lubin is a shot fighter after the ass whooping and messes you up mentally. Possibly. More on that in a minute. Let me hit on Golovkin. And let me try to frame this because if you want to see my thoughts on Golovkin in a 2-minute video, you can go to my Twitter at CalixBoxing2. Let me try to frame this not addressing the GGG detractors. And that's a tough thing to do. And I don't want to do that. But what I love about Golovkin is he takes what's given to him and he wrecks it. He destroys it. The Murata fight. It took him a little longer to dispatch a Murata than it would have 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 7, 10 years ago. But he got there at 40 years old. At 40 years old, your reflexes aren't going to be as they're naturally like they were 5, 10 years ago when you were 30, 35, 25. Your legs aren't going to be there how they used to be. But the great fighters can get there, especially power punchers, as George Foreman proved against Michael Moore, because that's the last that leaves. The problem with it for power punchers late in their career is it's harder to set up those punches because the reflexes in the legs aren't there how they used to be. So it takes a little longer for George Foreman. It took 11, however many rounds to get to Michael Moore's chin. For Golovkin, it took 9 rounds to get to Murata, to where Murata couldn't take anymore. Whereas it could have taken him 4 or 5 rounds 5 years ago. You saw that with Tiger Woods, right? At the Masters. Tiger Woods shoots a 71 on Thursday. The problem with golf is he's got to do that again Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So you can't really compare it to boxing. But Tiger Woods can still shoot a 71 at Augusta, how he could 5, 10 years ago, but it takes him longer to get there. All right, it's going to take him 4 hours to shoot that 71 instead of the 3.5. He's got to go a roundabout way of getting there. You see that with all great athletes later in their career. Same with Golovkin. But Golovkin was still able to do it. Golovkin, you still saw the parrying. You still saw the footwork. You still saw the cutting off of the ring. You still saw the power shots. You still saw him mixing up the body with upstairs. You still saw him taking shots, as I explained that Golovkin does this. He takes shots early in fights, especially if he doesn't respect your power, in order to lure you into an offensive-minded fight. He did it against Kell Brook. That's the most famous example of it that I can give. He didn't respect Kell Brook's power moving up 2 weight classes. So he said, I'll let you get off some shots early. If you want to mix it up with me, that's fine. Let's do it. And broke Kell Brook's jaw. And he did with Murata here. And Murata, credit to Murata, man. Credit to Murata. He came to fight after a 2.5-year layoff. He was a legit champion. Well, there are a lot of guys who have belts who aren't deserving of belts, but Murata is a legit top 5 or 6 guy in the weight class, according to the rankings. He does have a legit championship, whether he's been active or not. And it is a unification fight. And Golovkin became the second fighter, 40 plus, to become a unified champion. Bernard Hopkins the other. And it's crazy how Golovkin's career somewhat mirrors Bernard Hopkins. Bernard Hopkins beat the top guys available to him until he finally got his shot against Oscar De La Hoya moving up in weight class. Golovkin, the same thing when Canelo moved up in weight class and fought Golovkin and gave him the shot that he had been waiting for. But with this fight, you saw all the same things you've been seeing from Golovkin in the past. It just took him a little longer, right? So you say, moving forward, how does this look going up against Canelo? Can Golovkin somehow be competitive against Canelo? There are 2 theories here that I think of in my head when I think of Canelo versus Golovkin 3. One is Canelo is a better fighter. Canelo has gotten better each fight since that second Golovkin fight. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. I think we'd all be in agreement that Canelo has gotten better in each fight since the second Canelo fight. We can't say the same thing about Triple G. We don't know. We simply don't know. It was a good win against Murata. Good win against Murata. But like I said, 4 years ago, I think it would have been an even more emphatic win and an earlier victory. So is Golovkin the same fighter he was 4 years ago? I can't say the same. I certainly can say he hasn't gotten better as I think Canelo has as a fighter. Canelo has simply gotten better each fight. So if I take theory number 1, Canelo's gotten better as a fighter. Canelo is more comfortable at 168. Golovkin will be moving up in weight, and Golovkin's 40 years old. So Canelo should beat Golovkin clearly this time. Clearly. And I don't think either guy will ever be able to knock out the other. I just don't. Even at 40 years old, I don't think Canelo will be able to stop or knock out Golovkin. I don't think Golovkin will be able to knock out Canelo. I think they're just not going to get each other out of there. I don't think they'll ever be able to. I think they can fight 10 times. I don't think either guy will be able to get the other guy out of there. But if I'm taking that theory, number 1, I think Canelo could win 8-9 rounds this time. Theory number 2, and I thought about this, the Pacquiao versus Marquez 3 theory. The Pacquiao versus Marquez 3 theory is, if you rewind, leading up to Pacquiao versus Marquez 3, what happened? You go on YouTube, you go on Twitter, everybody, and there's going to be revisionist history. People say, oh, I thought Marquez was going to beat Pacquiao. But what happened? You come on YouTube and you go on Twitter, wherever, Facebook, everybody was predicting Pacquiao to beat Marquez. And everybody was predicting Pacquiao to beat Marquez fairly easy. I remember this. And the reason being, Pacquiao looked like a different beast at 147. Pacquiao looked like a different beast at this point in his career. Marquez looked like his trajectory was going down. Marquez was moving up in weight. He was going to face a stronger Pacquiao. And at this weight class, at this point in their careers, it wasn't going to happen for Marquez. And what happened? Pacquiao got the decision, but most of the boxing public felt Marquez won that fight. Marquez looked good in that fight. And then they fight a fourth time, and we all saw what happened that time. So we have the Pacquiao versus Marquez 3 theory, that no matter how many times these guys fight, and I just threw that out there as far as knockouts, I don't think either one of these guys will ever be able to knock each other out. No matter how many times they fight each other, they can fight each other 10 times. They will always be in a close fight, a close decision fight every single time. 7-5 either way. Draw. They will always be in a close fight, no matter how many times they fight each other. Now, Marquez knocked out Pacquiao the fourth time, which none of us saw coming. So you always have to throw out that wild card. But what I'm saying is, Canelo and Golovkin, some guys just make beautiful music together. And I understand Canelo's fringe base hates Golovkin, same the other way. But you got to respect both fighters. And these guys make beautiful music together. It's the reason we're having a third fight. It's the reason every time somebody does a poll, Golovkin is number one when his name is mentioned in a poll as to who you want to see Canelo fight next. It's the reason when you go talk to one of your casual fan friends, they're not going to know who Bivol is. They're not going to know who Beterbiev is. They're not going to know any of those guys, but they know Triple G, and they'd rather see the Triple G fight other than the other ones. So the second theory, the Pacquiao versus Marquez 3 theory, is no matter how many times these guys fight each other, I don't care if Golovkin is 40 years old, trajectory going down, even after beating Murata, not the same fighter he was 4 years ago. And Canelo's trajectory going up, and Canelo more comfortable at this weight class 168, a weight class he's fought at multiple times, and Golovkin not comfortable at 168. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the ring size is. It doesn't matter the glove size. It doesn't matter the weight class. It doesn't matter the age. These guys, when they get in the ring with each other, it's always going to be a close fight. So that's the second theory. That's the second theory. I'm not saying that's going to happen. It could be the first theory. It could be Canelo wins an easy decision this time. Canelo looks a lot better. I'm just saying, if you're a Canelo fan, which I am, I consider myself more of a Canelo fan than Golovkin. Much more, actually. But if I would say if you're a Canelo fanboy and you're banking on Golovkin looking like the first 4 rounds of Murata in the first 4 rounds of Canelo, it's a big jump. I don't know if I trust that, especially since the ring rust is off now. I don't know, man. I lean towards more of the second theory, that no matter how many times these guys have fought, no matter what the circumstances, it's always going to be a close fight. Let me get to some of these comments. For being 40, GGG made the right adjustments, and that he did. And he was himself. It just took him a little longer to get there. He needs more body punching, possibly. And he's good at mixing up the body with the head. He sold out both times versus Canelo. GGG didn't even try really and won both fights, in my opinion. He should have knocked him out the first time. Big shots from Murata. A lot of good comments here. And at the end of the day, he got the job done. He got his part of the deal done. The other part is, and we're all assuming that Canelo is going to beat Bivol. What does Bivol have that Golovkin has? The jab. And Bivol's naturally bigger. So Bivol's a tougher fight than people are giving him credit for. And it's not. People are just assuming that Canelo is going to get past Bivol. And I think he will. because I think Canelo's great and is a minus 400 favorite, so he's a healthy betting favorite, but I would not look past Bivol. So Canelo's got to hold up his end of the deal, and then we'll get the Golovkin trilogy. But Bivol, in my opinion, right now is likely the tougher fight out of the two, if I'm being honest. But then I go back to theory number 2. Is it? Will Golovkin always be Canelo's toughest fight, no matter who else is in the equation? I don't know. One thing I love about Golovkin, and you take the last decade of his career, what did Golovkin do that a lot of these young fighters up and coming are not doing? What did he do? Just think about it for a minute. He comes into the American fight scene late 2012 against Proska. Up to that point, he had only fought in Germany. He fought in Ukraine. Then he comes to America. What does he do? As soon as he hits the American fight scene, fights 5 times in the first 14 months. Develops a bond in a relationship with the American boxing public. Comes up with some cute, catchy taglines. Gives you highlight reel KO after highlight reel KO. So even if the top guys were not fighting him at the time, Sergio Martinez, and then Miguel Cotto after that, and we've been over this, the top guys in the weight class were not fighting him. He was fighting the best opposition available to him in the weight class and mowing them down every 3 to 4 months and staying in people's faces. And I remember he was ringside at like once or twice a month. He was ringside at somebody's fights, signing autographs, cheesing for the cameras. He stayed in your face for a couple of years there. I mean, he was in everybody's face until it came to the point where somebody had to fight him. In that time, so he had fought in Germany, he fought in Ukraine. Up to that point, he had also fought in Panama City a couple of times. He fought in Monte Carlo twice during that span. He also fought in the UK against Kell Brook. So he was a world traveler. He was going to people's backyards. He was fighting on the East Coast, the West Coast, staying active every 3-4 months, mowing guys down until Danny Jacobs, prime 160 Danny Jacobs, finally had to come to the table. They fought. He beat him. And then got the Canelo fight right after that. And then got the second Canelo fight 2 fights after that. And also fought Derevyanchenko after that. Now, here's the thing. And this is where the GGG detractors, who I'm not going to spend much time on because I want to get to Lubin versus FUNdora before this is over. Where they get it wrong is they say Triple G is overhyped. And that works to a certain point until it doesn't. HBO was overhyping every fighter on their network, as every network does. It was a running joke. Max Kellerman would have 12 HBO fighters in his top 3 pound for pound. Every time one of them fought, he's my top 3 pound for pound guy. Max Kellerman had 12 HBO fighters in his top 3 pound for pound. They were overhyping everybody. He was calling Paul Williams the next Tommy Hearns. I mean, it was a joke. It was a joke. And HBO was overhyping everybody. But if you're overhyped, there comes a point when the correction happens. The correction always happens if you're overhyped. It happened to Nassim Hamed when he fought Marco Antonio Barrera, right? The correction comes. It never came for Triple G. It never came. And when you fought Danny Jacobs, when you fought Canelo Alvarez twice, that's 3 fights there. When you fought Derevyanchenko, and now when you go to Japan and fight Murata, and you're doing this in other people's backyards, and you're an entertaining fight after entertaining fight after entertaining fight. So not only are you great, you're an entertaining fighter. The correction never came. Still to this day, 40-year-old Golovkin, you can argue never lost a fight. The correction never came. And this is where the Triple G detractors get it wrong. You can't call the guy overhyped at this point. You can't. It doesn't fly anymore. This isn't 2015. And look, I'm not saying he's Marvin Hagler. That's the overhyped part of it, right? When I say overhyped, because he's not Marvin Hagler. I wouldn't argue that. But to say he's not a first ballot Hall of Famer, to say he's not a great fighter, to say he's overhyped, to say he's a bum, Come on, to say he's just a good fighter? The arguments now, the debates now should be how great is Golovkin? And when it comes from, it's disturbing when it comes from the Canelo extreme fan base because you're taking away from Canelo's legacy. And I've talked about this before. When you call Triple G overhyped, you're taking away from Canelo's greatest victory, which was the second Golovkin fight. Golovkin's a great fighter. He's a first ballot Hall of Famer. And on top of everything that he did that I just mentioned, he's moving up in weight class to fight Canelo a third time. He's moving up in weight class at 40 years old and fighting the top pound for pound fighter. And on top of that, I see people complaining, oh, he's getting $13 million to fight Murata, guaranteed. And he's going to get a ton of money fighting Canelo, and Canelo's giving him all these great paydays. What you're missing is the front end of it. What you're missing is he took short money after short money after short money in all these fights. He was making 5 figures for these fights I was mentioning when he first came to the United States of America. He was moving from continent to continent to fighting for 5 figures. It's the corrections that I talk about. And this was a correction. Him making all his money on the back end makes up for the short money he was taking on the front end. People only focus on the back end. I remember talking about this when I was into hip hop 20 years ago. And people would say, Eminem selling all these records because he's white. I mean, you're not focusing on him being booed out of places because he was the only white dude there when he wasn't famous. The front end versus the back end. All right. The correction eventually comes. And for Golovkin, it comes for many things, but monetarily, he's making $13 million guaranteed against Murata. Good for him because he took short money on the front end. And it might happen to Devin Haney. All right. People are saying Devin Haney's not getting what he deserves against Kambosos. Guess what? If he comes through this, Devin Haney is going to be rewarded handsomely. And oh, by the way, Devin Haney has already been rewarded handsomely, making $3 million per fight against lower level opposition than Kambosos. But that's just stream of thought. What I'm saying is give Golovkin the proper respect. Give him the proper respect that he deserves. And guess what? This is the beautiful thing. If you are one of those Canelo extreme fan base people, your guy's likely going to have another shot at him in September and will likely win the fight. Will be the healthy betting favorite against the 40-year-old Golovkin. So that's the good news there. So a lot to talk about. We'll be talking about that more. Believe me. Believe me. Shout out to Nopal. Let's see. Shout out to Hawker Mustang. GGG will never be more popular in the USA than Marvin Hagler, but I think in his prime will beat Hagler. I don't agree with that. I would never pick. I wouldn't pick any middle. I wouldn't pick Hopkins. I mean, maybe prime Roy Jones, but to say anybody beats Hagler, I don't know, man. Nah. I don't agree with that. But Golovkin deserves a lot more respect than what he's getting from a big segment of the boxing public. Lara is better than Golovkin and face tougher competition. I don't know. Jermaine Taylor was overhyped by HBO big time. But he beat Hopkins twice. Beat him. All right, so we got to give him that respect. Jermaine Taylor, no matter what he turned out to be, beat Hopkins twice. Is the only fighter I can think of in the 4-belt era that became undisputed by beating the undisputed champion. Jermaine Taylor will always have that. Always. We can't take that away from him. Now, Lubin versus FUNdora. Why I love fights like this, why I love true toss-up fights between top 5 fighters is because a lot at stake and we're going to learn a lot about each fighter. And like I was saying earlier in the program, we know more about both fighters sitting here Monday evening than we did Friday evening going into the fight. I'll tell you one narrative that was blown into space, into smithereens, was put to sleep, unlike Erickson Lubin. was that Erickson Lubin doesn't have a chin. The narrative going in that Lubin was chinny. Lubin ain't chinny. He took shot after shot after shot from FUNdora and had to be saved by his corner because he was too brave for his own good. Lubin, his face looked like Martin Lawrence after Martin Lawrence got into a fight on the show. I mean, his face was rearranged, and Lubin was ready to keep going out there. Keep going out there. Cunningham had to save him from himself. Phenomenal. As a boxing fan, that's what it's about. As a boxing fan, that's the stuff that humbles you, because you realize as a level-headed boxing fan how difficult it is to do what they do. And somebody said earlier in the program, I brought up the comment that Lubin will never be the same. And that's possible. And that's the tough thing about following this sport is, I always rail about guys need to fight top competition, but then when they do, stuff like this can happen. And that's what's good about having a Cunningham in the corner, is saying, no, man, look, no. We got to stop it. We got to save you for another fight. This one, it's not worth taking that gamble that you possibly land a big shot in the next round. It's not worth it, because we could completely ruin you in this fight. And that's the humbling thing about being a boxing fan, is how much Erickson Lubin put in before the fight. And not even before the fight, for years. Gets knocked out 4 or 5 years ago, in the first round by Charlo. And comes back and wins. It might have been 3 years ago. Comes back and wins 7 straight fights in order to get this shot against FUNdora, and does it against good competition. Gachet, amongst others, Rosario, Ishe Smith. Does it against good competition, works his way back to the top 5, works his way back to where if he wins this fight, he is a mandatory to fight Charlo versus Castaño. Works his way back up against FUNdora. All the work he put in to get back to this point, the training camp, and then he gets in there for 9 rounds and empties himself. Absolutely empties himself. Will he ever be the same fighter? I doubt it. I hope he is. I hope he's healthy. I hope he's fine. And I hope he gets another shot. And I hope he wins. Lubin is one of the reasons. He's a type of fighter. Those types of fighters are one of the main reasons I follow this sport. They want to be great. And they're willing to do anything to be great, and they're willing to give you great fights. And Lubin versus FUNdora was a great fight. I mean, it's up there with Conlan Wood as the best fight of the year so far. And I felt bad. Like I felt empathetic. I felt so bad for Lubin after the fight. So bad. I wanted that fight for him. And for boxing's sake, I was cheering for FUNdora, because I know what a great FUNdora could mean for the sport. Because FUNdora, true to his last name, is fun. FUNdora. He's fun. He's what you want in the sport. He's an odd, awkward guy, but he's great. Action-packed fighter. He's an oddity. And you want him to be successful in order for the sport to continue to be successful. But I wanted that fight bad for Lubin. I just did. I got to be honest. Normally, I just cheer for a great fight, but man, I wanted that one for Lubin. And it was tough to see him go out that way. He emptied himself. And what a great fight that was. Second round, I'm like, maybe they were right about the chin. Charlo all over again. And then he comes back from that, works his way back into the fight. And you saw beautiful back and forth on the inside. And that's FUNdora's game, right? FUNdora, as I mentioned in the lead up to the fight, the preview of the fight last week, And somebody was saying, oh, he needs to work on the outside and take advantage of his height. That's not FUNdora. That's not what he does. FUNdora sacrifices his height and his reach for activity and output. That's what he does. That's who he is. Don't try to change that 20 fights in. His dad knows what he's doing. His dad knows him. They have great chemistry. Continue on the same course and ride it until you can't ride it anymore. And that's what they did. And look what it's got him. Top 3 at 154, 20 fights in. They brought him up beautifully. We just talked about Lubin's activity, 7 fights in the past 3 years, 9 fights in the past 3 years for FUNdora, and against multiple different styles. Differing styles. I mentioned earlier, if you take FUNdora's career and you look at it 3 years ago and Ryan Garcia's, you would swear that Ryan Garcia would be further along right now than FUNdora. But guess what? He's not. One of the reasons he's not, FUNdora fought 9 times, Garcia fought 5 times. They exposed FUNdora to differing styles. They exposed FUNdora to better competition. And FUNdora is now a guy with an identity as a fighter. And he's a top 3 fighter in his weight class. And he's going places. Is he going places? The great thing about FUNdora, he seems to be making 154 comfortably. As a 6'5.5" guy, he looks like Lurch. I don't know how they're doing it, but he's making 154 comfortably. And why that's fun is he is short with everything except his height. His shots are so short. He shoots everything from the elbow. And when you have a guy on the inside, chest high, he's right there for those uppercuts, those short uppercuts that you don't have to lean down to throw, like a lot of fighters do. FUNdora can throw him standing straight up, and the chin is right there for him to hit. What a beautiful fight that was. Right up there with Conlon Wood for Fight of the Year. It's top 2 or 3 so far this year, almost 4 months in. And it's going to be a Fight of the Year candidate by the end of the year as well. I think it'll be a top 5, top 7 level fight for the year, even later in the year. And from FUNdora, going forward, you say, what's his ceiling? Well, we know he's entertaining. We know he can give us great fights. We know that. How talented can he be? He's already really good. 20 fights in, top 3 in a weight class where guys have been known recently to mix it up with each other. Unlike the 2 weight classes surrounding it, 147 and 160, 154 guys are mixing it up. And he's top 3 right now. So you got Castaño Charlo. So you say, how does he fare against the winner of that? I'd pick the winner of that over FUNdora right now, but intriguing. Also, you got Tim Tszyu also coming up. And FUNdora has more experience than Tszyu up to this point. Also, you got Danny Garcia moving up. Also, you got Errol Spence, probably a year or 2 for moving up. Terrence Crawford, a year or 2 for moving up. So if this guy, 6'5.5", can continue to make 154 comfortably, whoo, you have a guy who rains leather down on you consistently throughout the fight. Shot after shot after shot and varying shots. He's not a pattern fighter. Now, Lubin did figure out some patterns, right? Because Lubin was landing those hooks on him, particularly the left hook. And that's the shot that he knocked him down with in the 7th round. So he did figure out some patterns, but FUNdora is not an easy guy to time. And FUNdora does have some things he needs to clean up, those hooks, right? So you say if he gets caught with those hooks from a Charlo, from a Castaño, a guy with a little more power, possibly he can go night-night. Possibly. But look at the assets this guy has at 154. Goodness gracious. He'll rain down punches on you in bunches. Shot after shot after shot. This was FUNdora's best performance. And that's what you like to see as well, right? Like, you want to see a guy, the bigger the fight gets, the better he looks. This was FUNdora's biggest fight up to this point. Erickson Lubin, the legit top 3 or 4 guy in the weight class. 7-fight win streak against good opposition. And he stopped him. And he went through adversity to stop him as well. Shout out G Funky in the building. And look, I agree with this. Danny Garcia was a small welterweight, and he wasn't a great welterweight either. He was a guy, his best work was done at junior welter. But that's what makes it intriguing, right? And that's why Danny Garcia's name is fun at 154, because he gives you a name that's beatable. But he'll also be fun to watch. So FUNdora against Danny Garcia, FUNdora, I agree, he would pick him apart. He would pick him apart. But 154 is going to be a fun division going forward. It's been a fun division the past couple of years, but going forward, I'm telling you, the names are going to be at 154, and FUNdora gives us another name. And this guy is one to look out for going forward. His trajectory, his stock is going up. He's getting better as the competition gets better. The Lubin fight was his toughest competition, and he looked the best he's looked against Lubin. Credit to him, and what a great fight. I just love the ebb and flow of it. I love that Lubin went through some adversity early in the fight, got caught, then he comes back from that and just works his way back in the fight. In between FUNdora landing big shots, Lubin would try to time him and catch him with those big hooks. And then he would find a way to work FUNdora back and try to get him to fight on his back foot. But he wasn't doing that enough. And I understand why. It's just, it's easy to say, time this guy. It's easy to say, stay in his chest. It's easy to say, work the body, when you're not the one having leather rain down on top of you. And a guy who's willing to throw at that output with power, with short shots. These aren't wide shots, short shots that hurt. As Emmanuel Stewart always said, and I've said it before, it's different when you're fighting a pressure fighter who is taller. Paul Williams, Antonio Margarito, add FUNdora to that. It's just a different type of pressure. And it's going to take a precise puncher. It's going to take a guy who can go to the body. It's going to take a guy who is willing to stay calm. But Lubin did all of those things. That's the thing. Like, Lubin did all of those things. Lubin fought a hell of a fight. So this isn't one of those fights where you say, oh, Lubin dropped the ball. I saw somebody say Lubin abandoned the jab. Lubin didn't abandon the jab. FUNdora took it away from him. Lubin fought a hell of a fight. Lubin fought an A+ fight. Wasn't good enough. That's what's special about FUNdora here. Fought his best fight against his best competition. Stock going up. So I'm out. This is the Upjab Podcast. I appreciate y'all all coming on. More tomorrow. God